He had only $8 left, and a past he could never outrun. A veteran Navy SEAL and his loyal dog walked into a forgotten outpost deep in the northern forest. No one knew that beneath that place, something had been waiting for the right person to arrive. Then the storm came. White, silent, and deadly enough to erase an entire town overnight. One by one, strangers appeared at his door, and he had to decide who he was going to be. Because sometimes, the hardest battle isn't survival. It's choosing not to walk away. Before we begin, tell me where you're watching from, and don't forget to like and subscribe to Veteran Dog Stories. The forest in northern Minnesota did not wake like other places. It didn't rush. It didn't shout. It simply breathed. Morning light filtered down through towering pines and slender white-barked birch trees, thin as memory and just as fragile. The sunlight didn't fall in straight lines. It drifted, scattered across the damp earth like fragments of something forgotten. The ground was still cool from the night, carrying the scent of moss, wood, and distant water. Thane Wilder walked through it as if he had no weight. At a distance, he looked like a man carved from something harder than flesh. Broad shoulders, a straight back that refused to bend, even when everything else in his life had. Up close, the details told a different story. His jaw was sharp, lined with rough stubble that hadn't been shaved clean in days. His skin was weathered, sunburned in places, pale in others, like someone who had spent too much time outside and nowhere long enough to belong. His eyes were blue-gray, not bright, not dull, just deep, like they had learned to stop asking questions. He wore the same clothes he had worn for weeks, an olive field jacket worn at the cuffs, a red and dark blue plaid shirt beneath it, dark cargo pants, and brown leather boots that had seen more miles than most cars. A military watch clung to his wrist, scratched but still ticking. A pocket knife rested in his jacket. On his back, the Eberly stock half-track backpack sat snug and familiar, like the last piece of a life that still made sense. He wasn't just broke. He was unfinished. And that was worse. Behind him, moving in quiet rhythm, was Ash. The German Shepherd was 5, maybe 6 years old, prime age for a working dog. His coat was black and tan, thick but short, built for cold air and hard ground. His body was all function, muscle without bulk, speed without wasted motion. His ears stood alert, catching sounds too small for human ears. His eyes, dark, steady, and intensely aware, never stopped reading the world. Ash didn't wander. He patrolled. Even now, as he padded silently over pine needles and damp soil, his head shifted slightly, nose testing the air, reading things Thane could no longer feel. He didn't bark. He never barked, unless it mattered. 2 years ago, in a desert half a world away, Ash had dragged Thane out of a crater that should have been his grave, and ever since then, the dog had never left him. Not even when Thane had tried to disappear. Thane stopped near a clearing where the trees opened just enough to let the sky through. The light was stronger here, bright enough to sting the eyes after too many gray days. He reached into his jacket and pulled out his wallet. It was thinner than it had ever been. Inside, folded carefully, as if that might preserve its value, was a single bill. $8. He stared at it for a long moment. There was a time when that number wouldn't have meant anything to him. A cup of coffee, a forgotten receipt, a tip left on a table without thinking. Now it was everything. He turned the bill over between his fingers, the paper soft from wear. $8, he muttered. Ash stepped closer. The dog didn't look at the money. He looked at Thane. That was the problem with dogs. They didn't care about what you had. They only cared about what you were. Thane exhaled slowly and slipped the bill back into his wallet. Not exactly a retirement plan, he said under his breath. Ash's tail gave a single, slow movement. Not encouragement, not doubt. Just acknowledgement. Briar Glen sat at the edge of the forest like a town that had forgotten it was supposed to grow. It wasn't dead. It just paused. The main road cut through it quietly, lined with small buildings that had seen better years. An old diner, a hardware store, a gas station with faded signage. Beyond that, the forest reclaimed everything else, creeping closer with each season. Thane didn't belong there. But then again, he didn't belong anywhere. He stepped into the town's public library mostly for the warmth. The building was small, modest, with large windows that let in the morning light. Inside, the air smelled faintly of paper and dust and something older, like stories that had been read too many times and still refused to fade. A woman sat behind the front desk. She looked to be in her late 50s, maybe early 60s, with short gray hair tucked neatly behind her ears. Her posture was straight, her movements precise, the kind of quiet discipline that came from a lifetime of routine. She wore a simple cardigan over a blouse, and thin-framed glasses rested low on her nose. Her eyes flicked up as Thane entered. Sharp, observant, not unkind, but not trusting either. Ash walked in beside him, calm, controlled, his presence filling more space than his size should have allowed. The woman's gaze lingered on the dog. "Service animal?" she asked, her voice steady but not unfriendly. "Military trained," Thane replied. That wasn't the whole truth, but it was enough. She studied him for a second longer, then nodded. "Well, he's quieter than most people," she said. There was the faintest hint of humor in her tone. Thane almost smiled. Almost. He found a seat near one of the computers. The screen flickered to life slowly, the internet connection sluggish but functional. He didn't expect much. Job listings he couldn't reach. Rooms he couldn't afford. Work that required things he no longer had. Still, habit made him search, because stopping completely felt too close to giving up. Ash sat beside him, his body upright, ears subtly shifting as he tracked the quiet sounds of the room, the turning of pages, the hum of fluorescent lights, the distant creak of wood. Thane scrolled, and then he stopped. A listing. County auction. The image loaded slowly, line by line. A wooden structure appeared on the screen, long, low, built from old timber, set against a backdrop of pale forest and open light. White Pine Outpost, abandoned roadside lodge, northern sector, condition unknown. Sold as is, starting bid, $8. Thane blinked, then leaned closer. $8. He read it again and again, as if the number might change if he looked long enough. Ash moved. Not suddenly, not sharply, just enough. He lifted his head, stepped closer to the screen, and sat directly beside Thane's leg. Then, slowly, he placed his muzzle against Thane's knee. The same way he had done in the desert. The same way he had done before pulling him out of the blast. Thane's breath caught. For a moment, the library disappeared. There was only heat, dust, the metallic taste of blood, and a voice over the radio. "Wilder!" Cut off. Gone. Thane blinked hard, dragging himself back into the present. Ash didn't move, didn't whine, didn't push. Just stayed there. Solid. Real. Waiting. Thane swallowed. "That's not how decisions work," he muttered. Ash's tail moved once. Thane stared at the screen, at the building, at the number. $8 couldn't fix his life, but it could move it. And maybe that was enough. "What do you think?" Thane said quietly. Ash tilted his head slightly. That was the closest thing to an answer he was ever going to get. Thane let out a dry breath. Yeah, he said. I figured. He hovered over the button. He didn't feel hope. Hope was fragile. This felt different. Heavier. Like a door that didn't ask if you were ready, only if you were going to walk through it. Thane clicked. The page refreshed. Bid accepted. For a second, nothing changed. The library remained quiet. The woman at the desk turned a page. Somewhere a chair creaked. But inside Thane's chest, something shifted. Not healed, not fixed, just moved. He leaned back slowly. Well, he said under his breath. Ash stood immediately, ears forward, alert, like he had been waiting. Thane looked down at him. Guess we're not done yet, he said. Ash's gaze didn't waver. Outside the window, the forest stretched endlessly north. Bright, cold, unforgiving. And for the first time in a long while, it didn't feel like an ending. White Pine Outpost did not echo when Thane moved. That was the first thing he noticed. Places abandoned long enough usually carried a hollow sound. Every step bouncing back at you like the building itself was reminding you that you didn't belong there. But here, the wood absorbed the weight of his boots quietly, as if it had grown used to footsteps and was unwilling to forget them. The long structure stretched from one end of the clearing to the other, its timber walls weathered but still firm. Sunlight slipped through the wide front windows, painting long rectangles across the dusty floor. Beyond the glass, the forest stood bright and still, and farther out, the lake reflected the sky like polished metal. It wasn't a ruin. It was a pause. Thane stepped fully inside, letting the door settle behind him with a low creak. The air carried layers of scent. Old pine resin, metal, a faint trace of oil, and something else beneath it all. Something clean, preserved. Ash moved ahead without waiting. The German shepherd's gait shifted the moment they crossed the threshold. Outside, he had been alert. Inside, he became something else. Focused, deliberate, almost professional. His nose dipped low, tracing invisible lines across the floor. His ears adjusted constantly, catching echoes too subtle for human hearing. Thane watched him. "Find something," he murmured. Ash didn't respond. He never did. But his body tightened. Not with fear, with purpose. The main room revealed itself slowly. A long wooden counter ran along the right wall, its surface coated in a thin film of dust. Behind it, shelves held chipped mugs and glass jars, all untouched but intact. To the left, several heavy wooden tables stood in place, their chairs pushed in neatly, as if someone had expected to return any minute. No signs of struggle. No signs of decay beyond time. Thane ran his fingers along the edge of the counter, wiping away a strip of gray. Beneath it, the wood was still warm in tone, rich, alive. "Still good," he said quietly. His voice sounded out of place in the stillness. Ash moved past the main room and into the kitchen. That was where things changed. The kitchen was smaller than Thane expected, but built with purpose. A steel prep table stood in the center, spotted with age but not rusted through. Cabinets lined the walls. A heavy stove rested beneath a vent hood thick with dust. Hooks near the sink still held a few old utensils, swaying slightly as if disturbed by something unseen. Ash stopped. Right in the middle of the tiled floor, his entire body went still. Thane knew that posture. It wasn't curiosity, it was recognition. The dog lowered his head and inhaled slowly, deeply, drawing in the scent like it meant something. Then, he scratched. Once, twice. Not frantic, measured, precise. Thane stepped closer, crouching beside him. "What is it?" he asked. Ash didn't look at him. He scratched again. The sound echoed faintly against the tiles, just enough to feel wrong. Thane brushed his hand across the surface. At first it looked like every other tile, but then he saw it. A faint seam, a square, subtle, almost invisible unless you were looking for it. "Well, that's not normal," he muttered. He stood and glanced around the kitchen, searching for something to use. His eyes landed on a rusted wrench resting near the prep table. He picked it up, tested the weight, then knelt again. The metal edge slid under the tile with resistance. For a second, nothing happened. Then, a dull click. The tile shifted. Ash stepped back immediately, ears forward, eyes locked on the opening. Thane pried the square free. Beneath it, steel. A recessed handle, heavy, old, but intact. Thane froze. Something in his chest tightened. Not fear, recognition. He had seen structures like this before. Not here, not in a place like this. But he knew what it meant. "This isn't storage," he said under his breath. Ash's tail moved once. Slow, certain. Before Thane could touch the handle, Ash suddenly turned away. Not toward the door, not toward the main room, but toward the far wall of the kitchen. The dog moved there in 3 silent steps and stopped. Then he did something Thane had not seen him do in months. He sat, perfectly still, facing the wall, not reacting, not searching, just waiting. Thane frowned. "Ash?" No response. The dog's ears twitched slightly, but his gaze didn't move. It wasn't confusion. It wasn't distraction. It was the same stillness he had shown once before. In the desert. Seconds before the ground had exploded. Thane's pulse quickened. For a brief moment, the kitchen blurred into something else. Heat. Sand. Static in his ears. He blinked hard. The forest returned. The light. The quiet. Ash finally stood again, as if nothing had happened, and walked back toward the hatch. Like whatever he had sensed had passed. Thane swallowed. "Yeah," he murmured softly. "I felt that too." He reached for the handle. The hatch resisted at first, then gave way, with a long, low groan. Cold air rose from below, not stale, not rotten, just still. Thane pulled out his phone and switched on the flashlight. The beam cut downward, revealing a narrow staircase of reinforced concrete steps. He stared, then laughed under his breath. "That's not normal," he said again. Ash didn't hesitate this time. He stepped onto the first stair, paused, looked back. Not for permission, for confirmation. Thane nodded once. "Yeah," he said, "we're doing this." The descent felt longer than it should have been. The air grew cooler with each step. The walls shifted from wood to concrete, reinforced with steel plates in sections. This wasn't a basement built by accident. It was engineered. At the bottom, the space opened. Wide, organized, intentional. Shelves lined the walls, stacked with sealed containers. Metal cabinets stood in rows. Large water tanks rested in one corner, connected to a filtration system that looked old, but not broken. A generator unit sat against the far wall, its casing scratched, but intact. Thane lowered the light slowly. Food, medical kits, blankets, fuel containers, everything labeled, everything placed with care. "This," he said quietly. Ash moved through the room, inspecting it like a soldier sweeping a structure. He sniffed each shelf, each container, each corner, his movements controlled and methodical. Thane stepped forward, brushing his fingers across a crate. Dust. but not decay. He opened one of the containers. Inside, vacuum-sealed rations, still intact. "Someone planned this," he said. Not panic, not desperation, planning. He moved toward a metal desk in the corner. On it lay a thick notebook. Beside it, a radio. Old, military grade. The casing worn, but solid. Thane's chest tightened. He knew that model. Not the exact unit, but the type. Field communication, reliable, simple, built to last. He picked it up. The weight felt familiar in his hand. Too familiar. He set it back down, carefully. Then opened the notebook. The first page read, Elias Mercer. The handwriting was clean, disciplined, precise, military. Thane turned the page. Dates, entries, supply logs, maintenance notes, everything recorded with care. Then, a line written differently than the rest. Slightly heavier, slower. A man builds this not for himself, but for the day someone else needs it more. Thane stared at the words. Something in his chest shifted again. Not pain, not exactly. Something closer to recognition. Ash stopped beside him, sat, this time not facing the wall, facing the notebook. Thane let out a slow breath. "Yeah," he said quietly. "I get it." Above them, the outpost stood silent in the sunlight. Below, the bunker waited. Not empty, not forgotten, just unclaimed. Briar Glen did not greet strangers. It measured them. The town sat between forest and water, like something that had learned patience the hard way. Nothing here moved quickly, not the people, not the wind, not even the passing of time. Old buildings leaned slightly with age, wooden signs faded under years of snow and sun, and the roads carried more memory than traffic. When Thane Wilder walked into town that morning, he felt it immediately. Eyes. Not hostile. Not welcoming. Just present. Watching. Ash stayed close at his side. The German shepherd moved with controlled precision, his head slightly lowered, ears shifting with each distant sound. His body didn't tense, but it didn't relax either. He scanned every doorway, every passing figure, every flicker of movement reflected in glass windows. He was reading the town, and the town was reading them back. The first place Thane stopped was a small general store near the center of the main road. A wooden sign above the entrance read, Dalton Supply and Repair. The door gave a low creak as he stepped inside. The smell hit him first. Metal, oil, and old wood. The kind of scent that came from years of fixing things instead of replacing them. Behind the counter stood a man in his early 60s, Jonah Creed. He was tall once, but time had folded him slightly forward. His shoulders still held strength, but his spine carried years of labor. His face was weathered, carved by lines that weren't just from age, but from long winters and harder decisions. A thin gray beard clung unevenly to his jaw, and his pale eyes, sharp despite the years, rested on Thane the moment he walked in. Jonah didn't smile. He didn't frown. He just looked. "You lost?" he asked. His voice was low, rough, like it had scraped against too many cold mornings. Thane shook his head slightly. "No." Jonah's eyes flicked down to Ash. The dog met his gaze without challenge, but without submission either. "Dogs trained," Jonah said. It wasn't a question. "Yeah," Thane replied. Jonah nodded once, then turned as if that answered more than words ever would. "What do you need?" he asked. "Supplies," Thane said. "Basic." Jonah reached behind the counter, pulling items down without asking specifics. Matches, a small flashlight, a coil of rope, a few sealed food packs. He knew what a man like Thane needed. Not because he guessed, because he had seen it before. "You're at the outpost," Jonah said after a moment. Thane didn't answer immediately. Jonah didn't need him to. "Didn't think anyone would take that place," he continued. "Not anymore." Thane set a few items on the counter. "It's still standing," he said. Jonah let out a faint breath. "Yeah," he muttered. "So are some things that shouldn't be." Outside, the wind shifted slightly. Ash stepped closer to Thane. Not nervous, just aware. Mara Bellamy found him before noon. She didn't introduce herself right away. She watched first, from across the street. Leaning lightly against the side of a ranger vehicle, arms crossed, posture relaxed, but not careless. She was in her mid-30s, lean and strong, built for terrain rather than comfort. Her moss-green parka was worn but well kept, and beneath it, a gray sweater hugged her frame for warmth rather than style. Dark outdoor pants and waterproof boots completed the look of someone who spent more time outside than inside. Her hair was chestnut brown, pulled loosely back, with strands escaping around her face. Her skin carried a natural tan from long days in the open, and her eyes, sharp, alert, missed very little. When she finally stepped forward, it wasn't hesitation. It was decision. "You're the one at White Pine," she said. Her voice was steady, direct. Thane turned slightly toward her. "That depends," he replied. Mara's lips twitched, almost a smile, but not quite. "Town's small," she said. "Doesn't depend on much." Her gaze shifted to Ash. The dog stood still, watching her with quiet intensity. Not aggressive, but measuring. "He always do that?" Mara asked. "Only when it matters," Thane said. That answer held more weight than it sounded. Mara studied him for another moment. "You planning to stay?" she asked. Thane shrugged lightly. "Depends what stays with me." Mara nodded once. "Storm's coming," she said. Simple, no drama, but something in the way she said it made the air feel heavier. "When?" Thane asked. "Soon enough to matter." They stood there for a moment, the silence stretching between them. Not awkward, but deliberate. Mara finally broke it. "You fix things?" she asked, nodding slightly toward his hands, his gear. "Sometimes," Thane replied. She glanced toward the road leading out of town, toward the forest. "You might want to fix that place faster than you planned," she said. Then she turned and walked away. No goodbye, no explanation, just a warning. Ash didn't move right away. He remained still long after Mara disappeared down the street. Then, slowly, he turned his head, not toward Thane, not toward the road, toward the far edge of town, where the forest thickened again. His ears angled forward. His body shifted, just slightly, not enough for anyone else to notice. But Thane saw it. That same quiet alertness, that same invisible line being drawn between now and something approaching. Ash took a single step forward, then stopped, as if he had reached a boundary only he could feel. Thane followed his gaze. There was nothing there, just trees, light, stillness, but something in his chest tightened anyway. "Yeah," he murmured under his breath. "I see it too." Lila Mercer arrived in the late afternoon. She didn't belong to Briar Glen. That was obvious the moment she stepped out of her vehicle. The SUV itself was clean, polished, too new for the town. It contrasted sharply with the older trucks and weathered cars parked along the street. Lila closed the door with controlled precision. Everything about her was deliberate. She was in her mid-30s, tall and composed, her posture straight, not from discipline, but from expectation. Her dark coat, charcoal, tailored, fell cleanly over her frame, and beneath it, a high-neck sweater added both warmth and distance. Her hair was dark brown, smooth, cut just past her shoulders, framing a face that was sharp, but not harsh. Her skin was pale compared to the others in town, untouched by long exposure to the elements. Her eyes? They were the coldest thing about her. Not cruel, just removed. She spotted Thane immediately. Of course she did. People like her didn't search. They located. "You're Thane Wilder," she said as she approached. Not a question. A statement. Thane didn't move. "Depends who's asking," he replied. Lila stopped a few feet away, close enough to be direct, far enough to stay in control. "Lila Mercer," she said. "My grandfather built the outpost." That landed quietly. But it landed. Ash shifted. Not forward, not back. Just enough to place himself between them. Lila noticed. Her eyes flicked down to the dog briefly, then back to Thane. "I assume you're aware the property is under dispute," she continued. Thane crossed his arms lightly. "I bought it through the county," he said. Lila nodded. "Yes, under a tax forfeiture classification." Her tone remained calm, clinical. "My family is contesting that status." There it was. No anger, no threats, just inevitability. "What does that mean?" Thane asked. Lila met his gaze evenly. "It means," she said, "you have approximately 30 days before the claim is reviewed." Ash didn't growl, but his eyes didn't leave her. "You're planning to sell it," Thane said. Not a guess, a conclusion. Lila didn't deny it. "There's a development proposal," she said. "Ecotourism. Winter retreat." Her voice softened slightly, but not with warmth. "With actual value." Thane looked past her, toward the road leading out of town, toward the forest. "That place already has value," he said. Lila followed his gaze, but she didn't see what he saw. "That depends on what you measure," she replied. Silence settled between them. Not empty, heavy. Finally, Lila turned. "This doesn't need to be difficult," she said over her shoulder. Then she paused, just briefly, as if something small had almost surfaced, but didn't. She continued walking. The sound of her boots faded against the pavement. Ash remained still long after she was gone. Then he exhaled softly. A low sound. Not tension, not release. Something in between. Thane crouched slightly, resting a hand against the dog's neck. "You don't like her," he said quietly. Ash didn't respond. But he didn't look away from the road, either. Thane followed his gaze again. The forest stood quiet, bright, unmoving. But beneath that stillness, something was shifting. He could feel it now, not in his mind, in his bones. 30 days, a storm coming, a place that wasn't meant to stay closed. Thane stood slowly. "Well," he muttered, "guess we don't have time to waste." Ash stepped forward beside him, not leading, not following, walking with him. The first thing Thane fixed was the door. Not because it was the most important, but because it was the first thing people would see. The hinges had stiffened from years of neglect. The wood had swollen slightly with moisture, making it drag against the frame when opened. It wasn't broken. Just tired. Thane worked in silence. He removed the pins, cleaned the metal with a cloth and oil from Jonah's supply kit, then reset them with careful precision. His movements were efficient, almost mechanical, shaped by years of doing things under pressure where mistakes weren't allowed. Ash lay near the entrance at first, watching. Then he stood and began to move. Not wandering, not pacing, patrolling. The German shepherd moved through White Pine Outpost as if it were already his territory. His nose traced the edges of the walls, the corners of the furniture, the threshold between rooms. Every few steps, He paused, listening, measuring, deciding. Outside, the forest remained bright. Inside, something was changing. By midday, sunlight poured cleanly through the front windows. Dust had been wiped away in long streaks, revealing the warm tone of the wooden counter beneath. The tables, once gray and dull, began to show their original grain. The air shifted. Less stagnant, more alive. Thane leaned back slightly, wiping his hands on a rag. "Not bad," he muttered. Ash glanced at him briefly, then returned to his patrol. Mara Bellamy arrived without knocking. She stepped inside as if the place belonged to no one, and therefore, to everyone. Her boots left faint damp marks on the newly cleaned floor. Her moss-green parka was dusted lightly with pine needles, her hair tied back loosely, though strands had already escaped and framed her face. She paused just inside the doorway. Her eyes moved slowly across the room, noticing everything. "You've been busy," she said. Her tone wasn't impressed, but it wasn't dismissive either. Thane shrugged slightly. "Didn't have anything better to do." Mara stepped further in, running her fingers lightly across the edge of the counter. "Clean." She nodded once. "Most people would have left it," she said. Thane didn't answer. Mara glanced toward the kitchen. "You find anything else down there?" she asked. Thane met her gaze briefly. "Enough," he said. Mara studied him, not pushing but not ignoring it either. "Storm's still on track," she said after a moment. "Pressure's dropping faster than expected." Thane leaned his shoulder against the counter. "How bad?" he asked. Mara didn't exaggerate. She never did. "Bad enough that people will start making mistakes," she said. That was worse than numbers. Jonah Creed showed up later that afternoon. He didn't knock either, just stepped in like a man who had known the place too long to ask permission. He carried a toolbox in one hand, old but solid, metal edges worn smooth from decades of use. He set it down near the counter without a word. "You missed a spot," he said. Thane glanced over. Jonah pointed with his chin toward a section of the floor near the far wall. Sure enough, dust, thin, but there. Thane smirked faintly. "Thought you'd catch that," he said. Jonah didn't smile, but his eyes shifted, just slightly, approval. "Generator down there," Jonah added, nodding toward the kitchen. "You check the fuel lines?" "Not yet." Jonah grunted. "Do it before night." That wasn't advice. That was experience speaking. Sheriff Owen Pike didn't come inside. He stood outside the outpost, hands resting lightly on his belt, looking at the building like it had surprised him. He was a tall man, broad through the shoulders, though age had softened the edges. His coat hung heavy around him, dark brown and worn at the seams. His face was calm, but not empty, lined with years of watching things unfold without rushing to judgment. When Thane stepped out to meet him, Owen didn't speak right away. He just nodded, once, then looked past him into the outpost. "Lights haven't been on in there for 20 years, he said. "They will be," Thane replied. Owen studied him, not measuring strength, measuring intent. After a moment, he nodded again, then turned and walked away. The days passed quietly. Work filled the hours. Thane repaired what he could. He sealed gaps in the windows, reinforced the door, cleared debris from the kitchen. Down below, he tested the generator. It sputtered at first, then caught. The sound was rough, but steady. Not perfect, but usable. He checked the fuel. Not enough for long, but enough for now. Ash adjusted to the rhythm of the place. During the day, he moved, constantly, checking, listening, mapping. At night, he rested near the entrance, never fully asleep. But there were moments, small ones, when he stopped, and looked toward the lake. The lake sat beyond the tree line, still and reflective. From the outpost, it looked peaceful. But Ash didn't see peace. He saw something else. His body would still. His ears would shift. His eyes would narrow slightly, as if the water held a memory he couldn't ignore. Thane noticed. Of course he did. He always noticed. "You see something out there?" he asked one evening. Ash didn't move, didn't answer, but he didn't look away either. That night, Thane returned to the journal. The pages carried the weight of time. Not fragile, but heavy with meaning. Elias Mercer's handwriting remained steady throughout, disciplined, controlled. But the words beneath it told a different story. Power outage, 3 days. 2 families arrived late. 1 didn't. Thane's jaw tightened. He turned the page. Snowfall heavier than predicted. Search delayed. By the time we reached the ridge, tracks were gone. Another page. I heard them on the radio. I knew the direction. I chose the wrong path. Thane stopped. His fingers tightened slightly on the edge of the paper. He didn't need more detail. He already understood. Too well. "Yeah," he said quietly. "Me too." Ash moved suddenly. Not sharply, but decisively. He stood from his resting position and walked straight to the front door. Not scratching, not barking, just standing there, still. Thane looked up. "What is it?" Ash didn't turn. His ears were angled forward, his body aligned with the doorway, listening, waiting. Thane stepped closer. Outside. Nothing. The forest stood quiet. The light had begun to fade, turning the trees into long shadows. No movement, no sound. But Ash remained, unmoving, for nearly a full minute. Then, slowly, his tail lowered, his body relaxed. He stepped back, as if whatever he had sensed had chosen not to arrive. Thane frowned slightly. "That's new," he muttered. Because it was. Ash didn't react to nothing. Ever. The next morning came colder. The air had changed. Thane could feel it the moment he stepped outside. The wind carried a different edge. Sharper, heavier. Mara returned. This time she didn't stay near the door. She walked deeper inside. Her eyes moved across the room again, then down, to the floor. Clean, clear, alive. "You're getting it ready," she said. Not a question. Thane nodded. Mara crossed her arms. "Good," she said. Then she hesitated. Just slightly. "You might not have as much time as you think." Thane met her gaze. "How soon?" he asked. Mara looked toward the forest, then back at him. "Soon enough that people won't be ready." Jonah arrived shortly after, then left, then came back again, each time bringing something else. Tools, fuel, parts. He didn't explain. He didn't need to. Even Owen passed by again. This time he slowed his walk, looked at the outpost, then at Thane. Still said nothing. But his nod lasted longer. By evening, the outpost felt different. Not finished, but awake. Thane stood near the front window. The light outside had shifted again. The forest no longer looked still. It looked waiting. Ash sat beside him, silent, alert. Together, they watched the road. The trees, the horizon. "Storm's coming," Thane said quietly. Ash didn't move. Didn't need to. He already knew. The storm did not arrive like a beast. It arrived like silence made visible. By late afternoon, the sky above Briar Glen had turned the color of old glass, pale and strange, with light still trapped inside it. The pines around White Pine Outpost no longer swayed in separate movements. They leaned together now, as if the whole forest had begun listening to one distant command. Then the snow came. Not gentle, not drifting. It moved sideways in long white sheets, driven by wind hard enough to erase the distance between the trees. The lake disappeared first, then the road, then the edge of the clearing. Within minutes, the world outside the outpost no longer looked like a place anyone could cross on purpose. Inside, the wooden walls groaned softly as the first strong gusts hit. Thane stood near the front window, watching the glass whiten. "Here we go," he said. Ash was already at the door. The German shepherd stood tall and still, his black and tan coat catching the dim indoor light. Every line of his body drawn tight with concentration. He was not afraid. He looked like what he had always been, a working dog built to move toward danger, not away from it. His ears shifted once, then again. He was listening past the storm. The power failed just before dusk. It didn't flicker for long. One weak pulse ran through the overhead lights, then the building dropped into a gray, breath-held quiet. The only sound left was the storm hammering the roof and the low whistle of wind at the corners of the windows. Thane moved at once. No hesitation. No wasted motion. He crossed into the kitchen, opened the floor hatch, and went down into the bunker with a flashlight between his teeth and a wrench in hand. The underground room smelled colder than before, dense with metal and still air. He reached the generator, checked the valve, primed the line, and pulled the starter. Nothing. He pulled again. The old machine coughed, sputtered, then caught with a rough, mechanical growl that filled the chamber and rose through the floorboards above like a second heartbeat. A few seconds later, dim emergency bulbs blinked on overhead, weak but usable. Not comfort, but structure. That was enough. When he climbed back up, Ash had not moved from the door. "Good," Thane said softly. "Hold that." A hard pounding answered him. Not on the walls, on the front door. The first to arrive was a man with a child in his arms. He stumbled in sideways when Thane opened the door, half falling through the white blast of wind. Snow blew across the floor in a wild spray before Thane shoved the door shut with his shoulder. The man was in his late 30s, broad but worn thin by fear. With a face reddened raw by cold and a brown work jacket crusted white at the shoulders. His beard was patchy, like he'd stopped caring 2 days ago. In his arms was a little girl no older than 8, wrapped in a blanket over pink pajamas, her cheeks flushed with fever and her small body limp against his chest. "Heat went out," he said, breath breaking. "She's burning up." Thane took one look and nodded toward the hatch. "Downstairs. Now." The man hesitated only long enough to look at Ash. The dog stepped aside without being told. The man swallowed, then moved. They came in pieces after that. A pair of elderly neighbors arrived next. An old couple from a cabin road near the tree line. The husband, Walter Boone, was tall but bent at the spine, with a long face, papery skin, and white hair combed carefully back despite the storm, as though dignity were the one habit he refused to surrender. His wife, Irene Boone, was smaller and rounder, bundled in 2 coats, her face lined deeply but softened by the sort of kindness that had survived disappointment. She coughed often, a shallow winter cough that sounded too fragile for the cold outside. Then came a young couple. College age maybe a little older, who had been driving through the county when the road vanished in front of them. The man, Lucas, was lanky and pale, his dark hair plastered wet against his forehead, trying too hard to act calm because the woman beside him was shivering. Her name was Emery. She had sharp cheekbones, wind-reddened skin, and a stubborn mouth that trembled only when she stopped speaking. She kept saying they should not have taken the lake road, as if repeating the mistake might somehow undo it. Mara arrived not long after, driving the last stretch of reachable road in her ranger truck before abandoning it half a mile out and walking in with 2 more people from the forest cabins. Snow clung to her shoulders and hair, but her face looked even colder than the weather, focused, alert, stripped down to pure function. She said nothing dramatic when she entered. She only took in the room, the bunker, the people, and nodded once at Thane like a soldier acknowledging another one had held the line. "You got it open," she said. "It opened," Thane replied. Mara looked at Ash, who had already returned to the door. "No," she said quietly. "You did." By full dark, the bunker had become a world. Not a pleasant one. Not yet. Just a necessary one. Thane assigned corners, blankets, rations, water. He checked the girl's fever with the back of his hand and had Mara help bring down a medical kit. He cleared a space near the driest wall for Walter and Irene. He set Lucas and Emery to work moving crates because fear behaves better when given a task. The generator kept running, but one light in the far corner flickered badly, and the water line coughed air before spitting out a weak stream. The old filtration system was working, but barely. Thane checked the valve again, then the backup container levels. Fuel was lower than he liked. A pipe in the auxiliary sink had frozen solid. Nothing was broken beyond repair. But nothing was guaranteed either. That was more honest than comfort. The storm had been raging for hours when Ash suddenly walked away from the door and crossed the room with deliberate calm. Not toward Thane, not toward Mara, toward Walter Boone. The old man had been sitting in silence on a folded blanket, both hands wrapped around a tin cup he hadn't drunk from. He had barely spoken since arriving. His pale eyes stayed fixed on the concrete floor, distant and tired, as if he were listening to another winter from another year. Ash stopped in front of him. Then, slowly, the dog lowered himself onto the floor and placed one paw across the toe of Walter's boot. The entire bunker seemed to grow quieter. Walter looked down. His mouth opened slightly. For one fragile second, all the years in his face broke apart. "I had one once," he whispered, his voice rough with surprise. "Korean War. Shepherd mix. Smartest creature I ever knew." Ash did not move. Walter's hand trembled as he reached down and touched the dog's neck. "He used to do this," the old man said, more to himself than anyone else. "Whenever the shelling started, he'd put his paw right there, like he was counting me back into my own body." No one spoke. Even the generator seemed farther away. Then Walter looked up at Thane, and something in his eyes had changed. Not healed, but steadied. Ash rose, turned, and went back to the door. As if that moment had been his to deliver, and now it was done. The first person to notice the pattern was Mara. "He always knows before they hit the door?" she asked. Thane didn't answer right away. Ash had returned to his post, head slightly lifted, body still as carved wood. "Not always," Thane said. "Just when it matters." Mara gave him a long look, then nodded, like she had accepted something she couldn't explain and no longer intended to argue with. At some point, the bunker stopped feeling like a shelter full of strangers. It became a held breath shared by everyone inside it. The little girl's fever dipped slightly after Mara found the right medicine, and Thane forced her father to sit and drink water. Lucas stopped pretending to be useful and actually became useful, helping Jonah, who had arrived much later, white with snow from beard to boots, check the extra fuel cans and the hand tools near the generator. Emery wrapped blankets around Irene and told her stories about Chicago traffic as if the absurdity of it all could keep the old woman warm. Jonah said very little, as usual. But once, while tightening a hose clamp near the generator, he glanced at Thane and muttered, "Elias would have hated the wiring on this thing." "That's supposed to help?" Thane asked. Jonah's beard twitched with the nearest thing he had to humor. It means he expected somebody to keep improving it. That sat in the air longer than the sentence deserved. Near midnight, the storm deepened. The roof shuddered once under a hard wave of wind. Somewhere above, snow slid down the side of the outpost with a long, dragging hiss. The sound made Emery flinch. Walter closed his eyes. The little girl whimpered in her sleep. And Ash stood, not gradually, all at once. The hair along his spine rose. A low growl built in his chest, deep enough to feel before hearing it. Every head in the bunker turned. Thane was already moving. Ash! The dog did not look at him. He was facing the hatch now, not the front door upstairs. Beyond it, beyond the walls, beyond the lightless, white world no one else could hear through. He growled once more, soft, certain, not panic, warning. Mara stood too. "What is it?" she asked. Thane looked toward the ceiling, toward the buried night above the wooden floorboards, then back at the dog. He didn't answer. Because there was no answer yet, only that Ash had heard something the storm was trying to hide. And somewhere beyond the outpost, in the erased world of snow and dark trees, something, or someone, was still out there. The bunker held its breath, and Ash did not stop listening. The signal came thin. Not a voice, not a clear message, just fragments. The radio in the bunker crackled once, then again. Sharp bursts of static cutting through the low hum of the generator. The sound drew every eye in the room, not because it was loud, but because it was rare. Jonah moved first. He leaned over the old unit, his weathered fingers adjusting the dial with careful precision. His pale eyes narrowed, listening the way only someone who had spent years repairing broken things could listen. Not for clarity, but for meaning buried beneath noise. "There," he muttered. A broken transmission slipped through. Vehicle, off-road, near, static swallowed the rest, then lake. Then nothing. The silence afterward felt heavier than the storm itself. Thane didn't move right away. He didn't need to. The word had already landed. Lake. His jaw tightened. Mara saw it. "You don't know it's her," she said. Her voice was calm, but there was tension beneath it now, like a line stretched just enough to hum. Thane didn't look at her. "There's only one person stupid enough to be out there tonight," he said. No anger, no judgment, just fact. Lila Mercer. The bunker shifted, not physically, but something in the people changed. The warmth of shared survival cracked slightly, letting something colder seep through. Walter Boone spoke first, his voice quiet but firm. "You step out there now," he said. "You might not make it back." Lucas nodded quickly, too quickly. "The road's gone. You saw it. There's nothing out there, just white." Emery said nothing, but her hands tightened around the blanket in her lap. Even Mara stepped closer. "You've done enough," she said. "You don't owe her anything." That word lingered. "Oh." Thane finally turned. His blue-gray eyes moved across the room, not at any one person, but through all of them. "I'm not going because I owe her," he said. His voice was quiet, but it carried. "I'm going because I know what happens if I don't." The room went still, not confused, not surprised, just understanding. Ash was already standing. The German shepherd had moved the moment the word lake had surfaced through the static. He stood beside Thane now, body aligned, eyes steady. Not searching, not questioning, waiting. The same way he had waited years ago, when everything had gone wrong. When Thane had made a call he couldn't take back. Thane crouched slightly, resting his hand against Ash's neck. "You ready?" he murmured. Ash didn't move. Didn't blink. That was answer enough. Mara stepped forward. "If you go," she said, "you don't go blind." Thane glanced at her. She was already moving, pulling a coiled emergency rope from a supply crate, checking the knots, testing the tension. Her movements were sharp, efficient, stripped of hesitation. She tied one end around Thane's waist, the other anchored to the reinforced beam near the hatch. "Storm shifts every few minutes," she said. "If you lose your line, you don't keep walking. You stop." Thane nodded. Jonah handed him a heavier coat without a word. Walter looked away. Not because he didn't care, because he did. The door opened. The storm hit like a wall. The world outside no longer had shape. The trees were shadows. The ground was suggestion. The wind erased sound before it could exist. Snow moved in sheets, rising, falling, spinning sideways, directionless and absolute. Thane stepped into it. Ash went first. The rope pulled tight behind them, a single line connecting them to everything that still existed. Step by step, slow, measured. The wind pushed. The snow buried. The cold reached through fabric and bone. Ash led. But not perfectly. He moved forward, then stopped, shifted, adjusted. His nose worked constantly, pulling scent from air that barely held any. Twice, he turned sharply, circling back a few steps before choosing a different direction. Thane followed. No argument. No second guessing. Because this wasn't about knowing the way. It was about trusting the one who could still feel it. Time stretched. Distance lost meaning. The outpost was gone behind them. The world had become white in breath and resistance. Then, Ash disappeared. It happened in less than a second. One step forward, then gone, swallowed by the storm. Thane froze. The rope pulled at his waist. The wind screamed. For a moment, there was nothing. "Ash!" His voice broke. Not controlled, not measured. Raw. It vanished into the storm before it could carry. His chest tightened. The past surged forward. Heat, dust, that same absence, that same moment when something that should have been there wasn't. Then, movement. Ash burst back through the snow, from the side, not where he had gone, where he had needed to be. He reached Thane in 2 strides, pressing hard against his leg, steady, grounding, real. Thane exhaled sharply, his hand gripping the dog's fur for a brief second longer than necessary. "Don't do that," he muttered, voice low. Ash's tail moved once. No apology, just presence. Ash turned immediately after. No pause, no hesitation. He moved again, faster this time. Not searching, not guessing. Certain. Thane followed. The rope dragged behind them, half buried in snow. Then, the shape appeared. Not clear, not whole. Just a break in the white. A darker line where something interrupted the storm. Ash barked once. Sharp. Directed. Not panic. Discovery. Thane pushed forward. The wind fought him. The snow pulled at his legs. But he moved. Because now, there was something to reach. The vehicle sat half buried near the edge of the lake road. Black. Angled. One side swallowed by drifted snow, the other exposed just enough to show the outline of a door. The hazard lights blinked faintly beneath ice. Alive, but fading. Thane reached it, pulled at the handle, frozen. He slammed his shoulder into the door once, twice. The metal gave, barely. Ash moved to the other side, circling, barking once more, then pawing at the lower edge where snow had packed thick. Thane followed the signal, cleared it, The door opened. Lila Mercer was inside. She was barely conscious. Her skin had gone pale, almost gray beneath the cold. Her dark hair clung to her face in frozen strands, and her breath came shallow, uneven. But her hands were still holding something. A box, metal, old, military-issued. Thane didn't hesitate. He lifted her. Her body was lighter than he expected. Not weak, just cold. He adjusted her across his shoulder, securing her with one arm. The box remained pressed against her chest, even now, even here. Ash moved immediately, back the way they had come. Not guessing, not wandering, leading. The rope pulled, the wind howled, the storm tried to take them sideways. But step by step, they moved. The outpost appeared slowly, a shadow, then a shape, then light, faint, but there. The door opened before they reached it. Mara and Jonah pulled them inside. The storm cut off instantly behind them. Warmth, noise, life. They moved fast, down the hatch, into the bunker. Blankets, heat, water. Mara took over without being told, her hands steady as she worked to bring Lila back from the edge. Jonah checked her pulse. Walter turned away again. Lucas and Emery cleared space. Thane stepped back. For the first time since leaving, he stopped moving. Ash sat beside him, silent, watching. After a moment, Thane looked down at the box, still clutched in Lila's hands. He knelt, carefully, pried it free. Inside, a radio, old, worn, familiar. The same kind, the same design, the same era. Thane stared at it, then at her, then at Ash. "Not an accident," he said quietly. Ash didn't respond, but his eyes didn't leave Lila. The storm did not end with a sound. It ended with light. Morning came quietly to White Pine Outpost, as if the world had decided not to wake too quickly after what it had endured. The wind had softened into a distant breath, and the heavy white that had erased everything the night before now lay still across the land, reshaping it into something almost gentle. The lake returned first, a long, frozen mirror stretching between the trees, reflecting a pale sky that looked new, as if it had been washed clean. Then the road emerged. Not fully, but enough. Enough for direction, enough for memory. Inside the outpost, the air had changed. The bunker no longer felt like a place of waiting. It felt like a place that it held. People moved slower now, not from fear, but from the quiet exhaustion that follows survival. Blankets were folded. Cups were emptied. Conversations returned in low, careful tones, as if no one wanted to break the fragile calm that had settled over them. Thane stood near the ladder, one hand resting lightly on the cold metal rail. He didn't need to check the generator anymore. It was still running, still holding. Ash lay beside the entrance. For the first time since the storm began, his body had loosened. Not fully, never fully, but enough that his breathing slowed, steady and deep, his head resting across his front paws. The tension that had shaped him through the night had softened into something quieter. Not rest. Completion. Lila Mercer sat near the far wall. Wrapped in blankets, her dark coat removed and folded beside her. She looked smaller than she had the day before. Not weaker, but stripped of something that had once made her seem untouchable. Her hair, once perfectly arranged, now fell loosely around her face. Strands clung to her cheeks where melted frost had dried. Her skin still carried the pale imprint of cold, but warmth had begun to return beneath it. In her hands, the letter. She had read it before. That much was clear from the way she held it. Not like something new, but like something familiar that had never truly been seen. Her fingers traced the edges of the paper slowly, as if following a map she had once ignored. Her voice when she spoke was quiet, not meant for the room, but heard anyway. "He didn't leave," she said. No one interrupted. Mara leaned lightly against the wall, arms folded, watching without intruding. Jonah sat on an overturned crate, his hands resting on his knees. Eyes lowered in a way that suggested he understood more than he would ever say. Walter Boone sat nearby, his pale eyes steady, as if witnessing something he had waited a long time to see. Thane didn't move. He simply listened. Lila looked up, not at anyone in particular, but past them, as if the memory she had found wasn't in the room, but somewhere just beyond it. "I thought he chose this place over us," she said. Her voice didn't break, but it changed. He missed birthdays, holidays, calls. She swallowed once. "I thought he didn't care enough to come back." She looked down at the letter again. And maybe he didn't come back because he couldn't leave. The words settled, heavy, real. Her hand tightened slightly around the page. "There was a winter," she said slowly, "when I was 9. Her eyes softened, not with weakness, but with distance. "I wandered too far from the cabin. Snow came in fast. I remember I couldn't see anything. I couldn't even hear myself anymore." Her breath caught, not sharply, just enough to show the edge of something long buried. "I thought I was gone." Silence held the space. Then, "He found me." Her voice dropped. "He didn't say anything. He just picked me up and walked." Thane felt something shift inside his chest. Not unfamiliar, not new, just understood. Ash stood, without warning, without tension. He moved across the bunker, past the others, until he reached Lila. Then he stopped, not close enough to touch, close enough to be felt. He sat, perfectly still, and looked at her, not through her, not past her, at her. Lila's breath faltered. Her eyes met his. For a moment the room disappeared again. Not into chaos, but into memory. A different winter, a different silence, a different kind of fear. And something beside her. Something steady. Something that had found her when she couldn't find her way back. Her hand trembled slightly as she lowered the letter. "You're not him?" she whispered. Ash didn't move. Didn't need to. The truth didn't require agreement, only recognition. Lila exhaled slowly, and for the first time since she had arrived, she smiled. Not wide, not certain, but real. The decision came without ceremony. No speech, no declaration, just a quiet shift in direction. "I'll withdraw the claim," Lila said. The words were simple, clean, but they carried more weight than anything said before. Jonah glanced up. Mara's arms loosened slightly. Walter nodded once, as if something unfinished had just been resolved. Thane didn't react immediately. He watched her. Not for the decision, for the reason behind it. Lila met his gaze. "This place doesn't belong to me," she said. Then she paused and added, "It belongs to whoever keeps the door open." No one argued, because no one needed to. The storm had passed, but its work remained. The days that followed did not rush. They unfolded. Snow melted slowly along the edges of the clearing, revealing the earth beneath in patches of dark brown and green. The lake softened at its surface, cracking in quiet lines that spread outward like veins returning to life. The road cleared, then widened, then welcomed movement again. White Pine Outpost changed with it. The windows stayed clean. The counter remained warm beneath steady hands. The kitchen filled with sound again, real sound this time, not echoes. Water boiled, coffee brewed, Voices layered over one another in small, ordinary ways that made the space feel full, alive. Mara came often, at first to check, then to help, then because she had stopped needing a reason. Jonah fixed what Thane could not, then taught him how to fix it next time. Sheriff Owen Pike began stopping by without pretending it was routine. He spoke little still, but he stayed longer. Walter and Irene returned once the roads cleared, not because they needed to, but because they wanted to see the place standing. Lila stayed too, not always, not constantly, but enough. Enough that her presence stopped feeling like interruption and began to feel like part of the rhythm. She moved differently now, less like someone passing through, more like someone learning how to remain. The sign went up in early spring, hand-carved, simple, mounted just beside the door. Open when the road closes. No one argued about the words, because they had already been proven. Ash lay beneath it most days, near the entrance, where the light touched the floor first, where the wind could still be heard before it reached the walls. One afternoon, as the sun dipped low through the trees, someone new stepped inside. A stranger. Mid-40s, tall, shoulders tight with travel, beard rough and uneven. His coat was worn, his boots carried miles, and his eyes held that same distant look Thane had once seen in himself. The man paused just inside the doorway, uncertain. Ash stood, moved forward, stopped directly in front of him. The man froze, not afraid, but aware. Ash didn't growl, didn't bark. He simply stood there, blocking, watching, measuring. A long second passed. Then, Ash stepped aside. The man exhaled, not loudly, but enough, and walked in. Thane watched from behind the counter. He didn't speak, didn't need to. He already understood. Some stories didn't end, they shifted. The light outside deepened, stretching long and gold through the forest. Thane stepped out onto the porch, the air cool but no longer sharp. Ash followed, stopping beside him. For a while they stood there, not watching the road, not waiting for what came next, just standing. Thane rested his hand gently against Ash's neck. The fur was warm beneath his fingers, solid, real. For the first time in years. He didn't feel the pull to move on. Didn't feel the need to keep walking. Didn't feel unfinished. The road stretched out before him, but it no longer called. Because this time, he had chosen where to stay, and for once, that was enough. There are moments in life when everything feels lost. When the road disappears, the light fades, and we are left standing in a storm we never saw coming. And yet, sometimes, the miracle is not that the storm passes, but that a door is still open when we need it most. Maybe that door is a place. Maybe it's a person. Maybe it's a quiet voice inside you that refuses to give up. Some people call it luck, some call it instinct. But many would say, it is God. Because the truth is, not every rescue looks like a miracle at first. Sometimes it looks like a stranger who chooses not to walk away. Sometimes it looks like a loyal companion who senses what we cannot see. And sometimes it looks like a second chance we didn't think we deserved. In our everyday lives, we may not face a blizzard in the mountains, but we all face storms, silent ones, heavy ones, the kind that test who we are when no one is watching. And maybe the question is not whether God is there in those moments, but whether we are willing to become the open door for someone else. If this story meant something to you, take a moment to share it with someone who might need it today. Leave a comment and tell me where you're watching from, or what part of the story stayed with you the most. And if you believe in stories about courage, loyalty, and second chances, Don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you don't miss the next one. May God watch over you, guide your path, and open the right doors when your road feels closed.